Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chairman, members on the distinguished panel, and the members, my colleague members on the panel, and the audience. I'm really very grateful that finally the issue of slavery in Mauritania and Sudan has received a hearing in this institution. Three years ago, we made an informal visit. We knocked on a number of congressmen's offices to really cry out about this issue of slavery. We as Pak Sudani, and I must also say that the Sudanese have always actually been speaking out in various forums about the fact that slavery exists in their country. The difficulties that we have faced over, until very recently is that we simply have not been very successful in getting, a receptive ear until very recently. And for that, I'm very, very grateful that, this hearing hopefully would generate a momentum for the ongoing abolitionist movement in this country. Now, to get right to the issue, I have produced my statements, and rather than going through the full text, I'll simply overview and provide the discussion that we have had so far in context. I think by the time we leave here, we will not walk out contesting the issue of slavery. It's a very, very clear-cut situation. And as a Sudanese, I would like to say that this system has really completely ransacked, devastated families. It has destroyed villages. It has destroyed ethnic groups. It has destroyed nationalities, all in the South Sudan, in the Nuba Mountains, in the Ngesana Hills. We are dispersed throughout the world, largely because of this issue of slavery. The other point to make is that the connection between the institution of slavery, the perpetrators of slavery, and the Africans who are being enslaved has had a very long, extensive historical, antecedent, and I have provided some highlights in my report, and that. All these African groups, whether being Dinka or Shilluk or Nuer and so forth, and I come from right south of the country, from Kajukaji, we do not know of any of our oral tradition that speak to a culture, of slavery. So simply to say that, that Sudanese, Africans are also involved in slavery, as some of the allegations that are coming forth, is simply not true. That the process of enslaving has always come from the north and continues to, to hate, very, very forcefully and brutally down south, and and if not really stamped out, will destroy the entire continent. The other point that I also want to make is that the connection between chattel slavery and institutional forms of slavery has to be emphasized. It has to be emphasized because it is at the institutional level that the government becomes, wholly responsible and connected. That there are acts of sale of human beings. I cannot emphasize it enough. The evidence has already been provided. But the government, and actually I must say successive governments over the years in the Sudan have created a context that allow for this system to, to flourish. And that context is revealed more recently in the declaration of jihad against the non-Muslim in the country, but also against Muslims who simply do not happen to, to believe in the faith of the ruling group. And that is also reflected in the first conversion of non-Arabs into Arab. And that is also reflected in race. So these three factors more, collectively conspire to create an ideology that has sustained, slavery over the years. And I think this is very important, because we can only, talk about ending slavery if we understand it in its, comprehensive context. And my colleagues on the panel have already, indicated instances in which black Sudanese are targeted, for slavery, and the hierarchy of this, slavering process. And the fact of the matter is that, if you're an Arab, a non-black Arab who is a Muslim, there is simply no question of, slavery. In fact, that is the enslaving group. And as the combination, and permutation proceeds, a non-Arab who is a non-Muslim clearly, is the target, for the slavery. An Arab and a Muslim who is black, who happens to believe in African indigenous cultures and languages, is also a target of slavery. And we see that in the Nuba Mountains, where the entire region has been sealed off and it's targeted for elimination. And before I move to the recommendation, I also want to emphasize the connection between slavery and genocide, because I think the Lady Cox brought that forth, but I also want to emphasize that in terms of specific acts, we know that right from the 60s in the Sudan, there were two clear genocidal incidences: the Juba massacre, and there was a massacre in Wau. And in the 80s, 87, there was the DN massacre, in which nearly 2,000 Dinka men and women and children were killed, and nearly 7,000 were captured and sold into slavery. And these are, especially in the case of DN and a Jebelen massacre, a massacre that in which Africans working on Arab farmlands were actually, forced to work on Sunday, which they as Christians regard as the day, their day of rest, and they were subjected to severe torture and massacre. Now, all those acts of genocide have actually had a consistency over the years in the regimes. So when we talk about the current slavery that's going on in the Sudan, it is perpetuated by this psychology, this ideology that basically makes one particular group subhuman clearly, and therefore a target of enslavement. Now, the question then is, what should be done? I think what should be done is, we have consistently argued that the situation now, calls for much more vigorous action on the part of the world community, and more specifically this country, because it clearly has leadership, it clearly has, has the force, it could actually have the will. We know that the country, Sudan, has actually been listed, on the list of terrorist nations, and it is because of this institution, the Congress, that moved swiftly to pass a resolution to put the country on the list of terrorist nations. And it is with that kind of force and swiftness that we believe that the issue of slavery should be given attention. It should be given attention because the terrorism that the country is involved, the current regime is involved externally, is also being actually imposed on the people internally, with impunity. I want to just say one thing about the embargo, the comprehensive sanctions. There was a response by the Assistant Secretary of State this afternoon, how sanctions would hurt the civilian population, how the problem of war, the situation is so complex. I must emphasize that millions of our own people have perished over the years. Thousands more are in conditions of slavery. How much more suffering can the world, expect of the population, in order to not justify imposing, comprehensive sanctions? The other side of the matter too is that if the world remains passive and aloof and, distant on the issue of sanctions, we know that the Sudan government cannot continue to fuel, to provide the fuel the wherewithal, the firepower, the economics to sustain the slavery within the country without external support. And it is in this context that comprehensive sanctions would really begin to address the issue of the slavery in the Sudan more comprehensively. I will end here and look forward to answering questions.